Ta-da! Hey, it works. Good. Okay. What if Aboriginal languages mattered? Right? The thing is, so far, they don't. So what I want to talk about is what we would get if they mattered. And I like the theme, more than words, because what I'm talking about is more than words. It's respect and it's knowledge. Okay, so this is brought to you by the number 3. Trying to get, okay, 3 is a small number, so I can do it in 14 minutes. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, what if Aboriginal languages mattered? One, we would be in better touch with our own history, okay? So I'm going to tell 3 stories about this. See? Theme, right? Theme. Okay, 3 stories about connection with our history. One of them is, you've seen in the news recently about the community of Slave Lake. Now, you might have wondered, or not, where does that name come from? Where does that name slave come from? What's that got to do with northern Canada? Well, it goes back to a time in the 18th century when the Cree were connected with the fur trade, and their neighbors, the Dene speakers, did not. Because the Cree were connected, they had better access to guns, and they generally won wars when they were fighting, or battles when they were fighting with the Dene people. So they referred to them as a Wakanak, which means domesticated animal, because they could be easily captured. And it got translated by some white dude as slave, hence the name, right? You didn't know that. I know you didn't know that. I'm so absolutely certain that you didn't know that. Here's something else that you don't know. This is my little party piece. The word Toronto. Toronto began 4,500 years ago, up in the area of Orillia, between lakes Couchiching and Simcoe. There was a place called the Atherley Narrows where the water runs very fast. 4,500 years ago, somebody got the bright idea of putting cedar poles across them to set up a fish weir. The water would go through, the fish didn't. It was a constant source of food. We don't know what the language was that was spoken by those first people, but we can be pretty sure that they named that whole area after that beautiful place that was connected them with the Creator, with food. When the Mohawk were up there for a brief period of time, they called that fish weir and the lake around it, Lake Simcoe, they called it Tikaranto, which means trees or poles that cross. There'll be a test at the end of this, right? Trees or poles that cross. Everything else is wrong. So when the French came up there, they have no Tuka in their language. They called it Toronto. And then when they built at the mouth of the Humber, they built a trading post there. They misspelled it as Toronto. Right? So there's a little history lesson in one word. And if we could only know that. I jokingly say that if there was some white dude called Joe Toronto that built a cabin too close to the Humber and it got flooded and he died, every school kid in Toronto would know that story. But because it's Aboriginal, they don't. And they're disconnected from their history. One more of these little one-word history lessons. Nottawasaga. Nottawasaga is an Ojibwe word. It means snake, river mouth. The snake are the Iroquois, because in the late 17th century, the Iroquois and the Ojibwe were fighting over Ontario. The Ojibwe won. The Iroquois usually tell me, okay, well, we didn't really want it anyway, because it's, who wants Southern Ontario, right? Anyway, the hockey teams will always lose there. So Nottawasaga is where the Nottoway, or snake, were waiting to ambush the Ojibwe. Mind you, I heard that from an Ojibwe fellow who taught me Ojibwe. You see, there's a lesson right there. The place name has a lesson itself. Okay, so that's connecting with our history. I got a lot more of those, but those are the only ones I want to put in a 14-minute presentation. All right, 2, intellectual tools. We do not use Aboriginal languages as a way of teaching in post-secondary or any educational level. We don't use it, and we should. There is so much we can learn, particularly in the social sciences. If people that were working in the social sciences knew about Aboriginal languages, it would greatly expand what they know and what they could teach to their students. A couple of examples, well, 3, right? 3 examples. Number 1, and this is going to seem strange, the words that the languages don't have are teachings. In Aboriginal culture, they use the term teachings to say something that kind of, its story is presented, something is presented, and you think about it. It's not sort of obvious, this is the main point, author's message, author's message. A teaching is kind of subtle. Okay, in my language, in the Huron language, and in every Aboriginal language I have ever studied, which is about 10, there is no term for guilt or innocence. Doesn't exist. So you imagine what that means in terms of, well, psychology for one. I don't know how parents could exist without guilt, right? It's my number 1 thing, right? You're breaking your mother's heart. I imagine no Huron never said that. Anyway, so what does that mean? That means that, you know, to me it keys into justice studies. Restorative justice is a relatively new concept in our justice system. A lot of it's coming from Aboriginal people. They have a vocabulary of restorative justice that we can learn from. And the vocabulary begins with, there is no guilt, there is no innocence. The Huron language also doesn't have comparatives or superlatives. No better, no best. No worse, no worst. Again, that's a teaching. That's kind of like one of those idea bombs, right? Think about it. Ever since I discovered that, I was translating for a movie that has yet to come. Damn. Anyway, so they said, translate for us, "You are my favorite daughter." And I discovered that I couldn't. You could say nice things about a daughter, but you have no favorite. And it got me into thinking how often we say, oh, that's the best, oh, it's the best, oh, what's the best, who's the best left-handed defenseman that ever played for a Canadian team, right? There is no best. There is no best. What if there is no best? We live by the best, right? Maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's a dumbass concept. Think about it, right? So it's just one of those bits. Number 3. Gender. In English, we use gender all the time referring to people. He, she. We do that all the time, right? If I'm talking about my sister who lives in North Vancouver, and I'd say she's a real soccer mom, she's really proud of her kids, and she's always sampling wine here and sampling wine there. Well, she lives in North Van, right? If you know Vancouver, that's a joke, right? But, you know, so forget that joke, all right? What I did is I constantly reminded you that my sister has not gone through an operation to transgender herself. She is still she. Oh, that's a she, right? Oh, yeah, did you forget my sister's a she? Did you forget that? Okay, here it is. Her, right? Now, we don't think about it. We're constantly hitting people over the heads with that. What if? What if? About 20 years ago, I taught a native studies at Laurentian. One of my students was Cree. She was from Waswanipi, which is East James Bay. And she told me a story about how she grew up in Waswanipi, but she was forced to go south to learn French and English. She came back. Her grandmother was telling her a story in Cree. And she asked her grandmother, she interrupted her grandmother, which tells you something, where she's been, and said, "Grandmother, is that a he or a she?" And her grandmother wisely said to her, "You've been with the white man too long." All right? So again, think of what that does. Think of what that does. Those non-terms, think of what they do. Right? Think of the implications of not having. There's only, of the 11 different sort of basic varieties of Aboriginal languages in Canada, only one does gender. The others don't. They don't need it. They don't need it. Another thing I wanted to mention is how you would do things like, I wish we had a course called World Psychology. And World Psychology, you would look at how different people psychologize the world, not just Europeans, not just professional psychologists, but how people psychologize the world. Okay? Think about that, right? The Huron believe that we have two souls, a heart and a mind. The heart was strong emotions, not love. I do this little routine called heart to heart, and how the English word heart, which is related to love, and that really horrible drawing of what a heart really doesn't look like. If it looked like that, you'd be dead. And we use it for love and trying real hard. A really nasty person is heartless. In Huron, if you were heartless, you would be dead. Right? But for them, if you have a bad, in Huron, if you have a bad heart, it means you're angry. That your heart is producing bad emotions for you, right? That kind of thing. If you have a slow heart, it means you're not quick to bravery, right? It's psychologizing the world differently, these two things, right? And they believe that both of them are necessary. It's almost kind of Freudian in a way, that both were necessary, that the mind is where peace was. And one of the favorite expressions is to make the mind like a field, in other words, peaceful. And that's what we should achieve. And sometimes you have to do that by letting the heart play out its anger. It is a psychologizing of the world. The Inuit use the term ihuma or asuma, depending on what dialect it is, to talk about self-control. It's a very, very powerful concept. If you want to learn about it, one of my teachers, Gene Briggs, wrote a book called Never in Anger, which is brilliant about how the Inuit had that concept of you have to control, because if you're dealing with, if you're waiting for a seal to appear like this for a long time, you need control, right? And if you want to panic because of a storm, you need control. And it was how they psychologized. But you can't have too much control. You can't be too focused in your thinking. They talked about old people. Old people need the presence of younger people because old people get too focused in on their thinking. And as I become an old person, I see how often I focus in on that kind of stuff, right? So it's just that kind of thing, right? It's just throw this up, see what it does, see how it sets things up, right? It's important to do that, all right? So the second thing I said was that, okay, it produces tools, intellectual tools in every field, right? In every field, social science, right? Every social science field. The third is the languages put us in touch with the people. You want to understand the people, you want to write about the people, you got to study the languages. I've been studying the Huron language for about 35 years now. Every year, the language teaches me about something that I couldn't imagine it would have taught me the year before. I always say that the Huron language is my best teacher. I've written 5 books on the language now. The 6th one, the rough draft, was last month. If I live long enough, I want to get 10, right? Just because not just because I can brag about it, or I could put it on a t-shirt. I have 10 books published on the Huron language, although I might. But I have not, without ego. But I want to do it because I want somebody to say, if that crazy bearded guy can write 10 books about the Huron language, it must be important. And believe me, it is. Thank you.